Right, so without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Jeongki Lim. Jeongki is the Assistant Professor of Strategic Design and Management at the School of Design Strategies. His practice spans from launching strategic initiatives in public and private sectors to researching and teaching at the intersection of design and science. His latest works examine artificial intelligence as instrumental and relational artifacts in creative learning and develop AI-enabled methods and systems that can meaningfully integrate with the art and design pedagogical practices. He has secured and leads the multi-year academic research collaboration with LGAI Research. His works have been published in major peer-reviewed conferences and journals like Digital Creativity, the International Conference on Computational Creativity, and AI in Education. His pedagogy focuses on making complex and pertinent subjects accessible and inclusive for diverse perspectives to participate and affect its development trajectory. This is manifested in collaboratively developing and launching new courses like the University Lecture AI, Creativity, and Social Justice, and the University Transdisciplinary Elective AI-Enabled Methods for Research and Creative Practices. Starting in January, he is appointed to serve as Dean of the School of Design Strategies, Parsons School of Design at the New School. So welcome, Jeongki.
Thank you, Savannah, and thank you, Daisy, for this great opportunity. I'm so excited and thrilled and honored to joining you. Excuse some of my growly voice this morning. In New York right now. It's a 5 a.m. So here we are in our global schedule. The I think one of the aspects of it, as I'm kind of going into presentation, is this. When I was convening with community of the photo ethics centers and learning about the work y'all doing, and also the types of space and conversation you're convening, I was deeply moved by how pertinent some of these conversations are and the types of kind of very thoughtfully created spaces to critique and think about how these technologies evolve and types of people you're curating for this symposium. So I'm excited and super thrilled to join you all, especially for Dr. Dodd and Daisy to make this work. So today's kind of next 30 minutes, and then I think we're opening up for conversations afterward, is kind of think about like three different things. One is just kind of setting up a little bit of backgrounds of how I'm approaching this topics of how the notions of creativity has been, to an extent, automated with recent technologies. And then I'll share a little bit of empirical work, types of kind of research that I've been focusing on, both at the New School and also at Aalto University in Finland. And then the last one is what are the implications and what are these kind of researches kind of leading to for us to think about how it pertains to learning when we think about emerging creative professionals, and also in the context of industry. And to kick off on some of these concepts and idea is we live in an age, especially in the photo ethics centers, has been already kind of asking these questions. So even before this symposium, of what does it mean for a creative practitioner in the field of photography, or to kind of think critically about the images in the context of like how these types of technology allows to generate this very compelling and almost like realistic images. I think it is to be noted that even still now, a lot of these images have a very plasticky synthetic feel to it. But I think it is undeniable we cannot ignore the fact that the efficiencies and also ability of folks to be able to use the technology to produce this types of quality of images, and the speed at which these things are being developed and trained and accessible for people to use it, is pretty groundbreaking. We've seen some of the works that have been done by, we've seen some of the forward-looking artists and creatives using this technology in a critical way. And I think some of these works has been kind of featured and discussed more during the symposium. But also it opens up really the questions of to what extent these types of generative AI technologies and machine learning methodologies is really kind of affecting how much of our what we consider as a creative process itself is automated. And I'm approaching this topic from a like art and designer educator's perspective as I'm situated in art institutions and design institutions like Parsons School of Design based in New York. And don't get me wrong, when we think about the notions of creativity and creative work, there has been always a different types of medium that's been evolving in what way that we express creative ideas. And the medium upon which is affected by both technology that we exist today and technology of the time, and also the context of society that engagement. But especially with technology like generative AI that we engage with, I think it's important to note that there is a little bit of distinctions of how this technology is very, very distinct. And then like one of the key aspects that I want to point out is beyond just a traditional computational methodology. I think the additional level is that this is an autonomous computational methodology. Now, in terms of field of what machines and tools can be in exhibiting the sense of creativity, or what we consider as creative, to an extent, it's not something new. So within the subfield of AI research, there has been an active research that's been going on even before the advent of Midjourneys and Google Geminis and ChatGPT. The field of computational creativity has been always trying to investigate these notions of how can we understand the notions of what we consider as creative through making? Can we create a systems that is able to either perceive as creative or produce an output that we consider as creative? And by making those through machines and systems, can we understand the notions of creativity itself? So even before a lot of these generative AI kind of blown up, there has been a very active research and practice that have been kind of going on in the space of that field of computational creativity. But what we have today then is as the speed at which this technology has evolved and adopted across industry, what poses the question from where I see it as an educator perspective is how much of these technologies are automating what we consider as a creative process itself. So for me, when I'm approaching this topic, and I'm always trying to think about in what way can we meaningfully integrate these types of technologies and generative AI and technology in both creative education and industry itself. Now, when we think about the notions of creativity, it is a very kind of broad terms, and it's a word that is can be used because it's a word that is used commonly in the industries and society. The definitions upon which that we operated can be very imprecise, but from the creativity research perspective, oftentimes when we consider as creative and is from, especially in a lot of psychological studies, is there are consensus on what we consider as a creative is something that is being perceived as novel, so something that's new, useful for sure. And then also there's element of emotion as well. It's like surprising. So the question then is if we're defining and thinking about what we consider as a creative is something new and useful and surprising. This notions of creativity then is in order to manifest that in individuals and ability to produce those things. This creativity also is going beyond just traditional institutions, art and design institutions like the New School in Parsons. This idea of someone's ability to make something new and useful is exhibits beyond just creative professional that's traditionally associated with art and design or photography, but also people think about the ability to make something new and useful is a agnostic to the industry itself, but it's something that's very important for 21st century educations. And it's kind of important to note that this idea of someone who's creative, someone who can produce something new and useful, is not necessarily always kind of confined to the thinking about what individual person is able to do. In today's research kind of context, when people talk about creativity, it's often kind of perceived in the field of a much more social cultural perspective, where one person's ideas and able to do things and make things, the usefulness and new things and surprisingness is being vetted by the field and domain upon which the persons are operating and the existing knowledge itself. So there's always kind of exchange of this kind of with a wider group in the field and in a domain practitioners, creative practitioners within their field to kind of perceive and keep shaping what they consider as creative. In the context of education, as you think about then how does one develop an ability to kind of approach problems and notions in a much more creative way? Pedagogically, there are different focus that folks do. Now, one of the contrasts kind of brings up and talks about a lot is an idea of now how a certain types of topics and teaching can be focusing on the idea of instructivism, as in the knowledge is already exists and then we're trying to pass it down, or rather the pedagogies and ideas are much more aligned with constructions of knowledge and thinking within the one person's domains and perspective. So to an extent, a lot of the art and design pedagogy that had exists so far and something in our world of a studio practices focus more on the idea of a constructivism. And this idea of a constructivism aligns well with some of the practices and domain within the field of computation and creativity that focus on this idea of a machines, artifacts, things are not just there to be autonomously creative, but engagement with that autonomous, the creative system can actually foster the creative capacity of the individuals who are engaging with that system too. And the computational co-creativity is a concept that is ranging in somewhere in between when we think about it as a computational tool, the computer supporters tool on the one side, and is something that we're used to, as in using, let's say, Adobe Illustrators with certain types of kind of capacity, to computational creativity, let's say that's fully autonomous. Computational co-creativity is considered as you're engaging with the machine, but you're still, your machine is interacting with you to kind of foster and really develop your creative processes. These types of concepts and ideas exist. And of course, within this context, as they're designing a certain types of systems, a lot of research have been thinking about this idea of who takes the initiative in those types of model. In what way can we design a system that kind of divvy up who are the one who's speaking, who are the one who's taking a task in terms of outcome that comes out, who's able to kind of engage in initiative in that creative project. And researchers have been kind of thinking about those are the kind of critical aspects of developing these types of work. But for me, as a computational creativity has been kind of researched predominantly in the computer sciences and psychologies and those types of work, and then those types of research domain. For me, it's like, how does these types of systems relevant from art and designs and creative capacity development, especially when we think about socio-cultural learning perspective itself. One kind of lots more theoretical kind of construct that is kind of useful as I'm approaching my empirical studies and the work is this idea of a creative learning. And this is something, a very intuitive framework upon which that we kind of understand is that how does one person and a group of people develop an idea that's considered new and useful, happen both in intrapsychologically, interpsychologically, as in, intrapsychologically, as in my own head, as I'm engaging with the artifact, think about new ideas and concept to develop new ideas. And that concept, internal concepts are shared with others in an interpsychological spaces. So where then learnings and ideas and development, those concepts happen. And this is kind of it seems very intuitive in a sense, but a critical kind of framework upon which that I approach my work is that we consider what we consider as a process of creative learning itself. And one of my kind of major work has been examining, as we often approach these types of AI systems, as we've been kind of engaged with a lot of different technology in the past, if we were to kind of consider them as a tool, begin to kind of notice about different types of how both my students and creative practitioners in the field of computation and creativity have been perceiving not just a simple tool, but rather perhaps can these things could be considered as a collaborator or peer, and these kind of anthropomorphizing kind of effects happens with these works. And these are aligned, of course, in today's branding and marketing, how these tools are being, how these technologies are being positioned towards a creative community, as in the terminologies like co-pilot. So I'm also actively aware how industries and companies are positioning what's the role of these types of technologies and creative practices today. And one of the kind of aspects of how we think about the notions and values of of how does one expands and what is the value of creative learning is we're engaging either combinatory, exploratory, or kind of transformative creative learning processes as one expand their own domain knowledge about a field and subjects by engaging in the creative learning activities of thinking something new, developing idea, articulating, producing artifacts, exchanging others. And then thinking about as we're engaging in these AI systems, as perhaps as a peer, the interpsychological learning kind of poses an opportunity to expand the conceptual domain a little bit quicker than just if they were to investigate this concept independently. So one of the aspects of the work has focused on um, these types of empirical studies where a lot of the work that I kind of focus on is I put them in what's considered a little bit of critical design, a little bit of a scenario where human participants and students is engaging in what's considered a very simple creative task, such as in this case, draw this cup, while the manifestation of an AI system is also engaging the same creative task. And often in this iterative processes, we examine how does one produces these artifacts and how they perceive the AI as they're perceiving AI is also engaging the same creative practice in the work themselves. And these are the types of work that we focus on. And one of the kind of foundational aspects of my work is this phenomenons of the relational artifact and subjective computer once it's perceiving an AI systems. And that is an idea that instead of we see things as artifacts and things as something that we are used to, Sherry Turkle at MIT talks very made a convincing argument in early 2000 talks about well, in 80s and into early 2000 talks about this idea how people enter into a form of a relationship. So these artifacts are not just functioning something, but it's also we enter into a relationship. So this idea of a relational artifact is something critical in as I think about the creative learning itself. So within that kind of background, I'll kind of jump quickly on two of the work that I kind of built from there and then how those things are relevant and thinking about what are the implications for that for creative learning, creative education, and industry itself. So the first kind of the papers and the work that I've been starting to think about saying, how can we think about this kind of relational dynamic? We know that how, based on both empirical studies and practice that I do at the institution, I know that peoples and students do perceive these AI system in a relational way. Is there a systematic way to kind of understand those things? And one of the studies I've done is a kindergarten in Finland who also prizes in their curriculum to focus on that creativity is one of the key aspects of the teaching and learning itself. So one of the experiments that I set up is similar to the one that you just saw in the video that of a kind of robotic arm engaging in creative activities and the study participants also engaging the same creative activity. But here that I start trying to think about and applying this concept of how can we kind of systematically approach in what types of action that happens in a learning can that be systemized and understood. Therefore, we can kind of approach this idea of a relationship more, more, more concretely. So this is kind of like one of the setup that is showing that a child is situation in a room with a teacher, in this case, is able to instruct the child to engage in a drawing exercises and then and discuss what it is. And then the types of activity that engage in this study is an idea of a counter compositional exercise that is very simply in a design pedagogy and exercise itself is one were to draw something, let's say draw a house. The participants are asked to now you change one element of your drawing, and then after you change the drawing, you ask them, now is it still a house? And then why is it? Why is not? Kind of articulating. So then you're trying to kind of understand how does one person approach the notions of a house and the visual representation of it and the elements of it changing it still affects the definition of this concept. So so children are engaging in that counter composition exercise, and then an AI system was also kind of creating in this drawing simultaneously with the students itself. And then we kind of situated these in a different types of pairing, child to child, child to AI, two children's engaging with AI in different types of setups. And we conducted a kind of semi-structured interviews with student participants in between to kind of do this work and what types of kind of learning can emerge from that. So out of this study, one way that we start kind of developing a systematic way is the idea of an activity theory. So this is coming from Lev Vygotsky, one of the Russian psychologists, kind of think about this idea of what we do is driven by a lot of what we do, the things we do can be understood in the context of actions and what people do, along with the cultural and historical kind of artifacts and subject that is influencing what we do, is shaping how we achieve a certain outcome that we see. So this is like an example of kind of me applying a kind of framework, theoretical framework to understand this system. And one of the kind of things that kind of emerge from this types of study is that what's compelling about this study was we start to notice that when a student was engaging in a learning activity, we start to notice one of the key kind of the proxy, one of the actions that they do that we focus on is in one of the kind of indicator or the associative action that's related with creative learning, especially interpsychological creative learning. We focus on this idea of speaking. Does the child, students, or with the teacher talk more, articulate more? Because we are start to kind of approach this idea of it's difficult to measure the creative, how does person become creative within this one empirical study and session. But we can consider that if there's a lot of occurrence of that creative learning actions, such as speaking happen, then the likelihood of that person have developed more creative capacity or led to the conditions of developing creative capacity has increased. So as we start thinking about creative learning actions like speaking, it's kind of simple systematic way to kind of understand it and trying to measure it, um, interesting things start to emerge. And one of the kind of the aspects as we're kind of measuring and focusing on ideas speaking is that clearly when a student is engaging in the learning activity on their own, definitely having a robotic arm drawing next to you, led to more talking. Um, and and that is similar to when they have their instead of a robot arm drawing, but when the student peer is there, they also talk a lot as well, talk more as well than rather than talking on their own. Now, The distinction is, though, is a robot arm, is the AI led to more talking than as and then having a student peer? And that kind of aspects, it was a little bit yes and no, where one would, so something to kind of emerge from this study itself is like AI definitely produce more creative learning action to happen, more talking, but it wasn't as effective as having a very verbal and engaging student on the side. And to an extent, kind of we understood like this dynamics by, well, one aspect, so there's a limitation to the fact that our empirical study AI system wasn't talking to the other person, so that there was no verbal encouragement, but rather the AI system was also was much more focused on executing the drawing. Robot arm was not there to socialize. Robot arm was not there to exchange ideas. Robot arm was there to computationally drawn to do a task that had been given, fed by the researchers and system. And that, while the students there to both do the work and have fun and to talk with teachers, talk with their peers. So that misalignment of expectations and the objective upon which the students were engaging in the AI system is engaging, even though in a community setting, that distinction kind of led to schism, that the kind of breakdown of their relationship or the limitation of their relationship itself. And of course, in this dynamic, something that we saw as critical is the role of a teacher, is what led to more student talking, what led to less talking. It's really driven by how the faculty, how the teacher was directing the activity, directing the attention of the child, directing the attention to the robots, and directing the attention to others. That was kind of critical aspects of why when one would engage more on creative learning, associated creative learning activities such as speaking. So then second aspect as of the study is like, okay, so we're seeing that there are relational dynamic happens. We can kind of systematically approach way, especially focus on the specific action itself as a way to kind of measure and thinking about it. Can we categorize this kind of relationship? And this study is, instead of kind of creating a kind of more a in-person physical environments of kind of developing robotic systems and things moving, we wanted the AI system to be much more learning closely from the actual behavior of human participants or students. So we created virtual environments, in this case, using the Unity virtual environment, a game scenario where it's a simple task of trying to learn to kind of touch the ball. That's kind of what's the kind of goal that I've been given in two scenarios. Now, within this scenario, the AI system is manifested in this little block here is also trying to reach the goal. The AI character is also trying to reach the goal. But we as a researcher kind of brought in some of the design choices, such as the human participant, the human agent, and the machine agents. They are kind of manifest similar ways, like same character design, and then they're simultaneously learning as the gameplays are happening. And then the AI system is learning from the behavior of the human player through reinforcement learning. So here's a very simple scenario one. This is how one would begin. The red blocks there so the AI systems and the human participant begin trying to touch the ball. The blue, light blue is in the middle. These are kind of the little triggers and the kind of incentives that we give to the AI system to kind of get to the next stage. And then the second scenario, we call it a secret passage, where you start to human participants, AI participants starting in the room. Human participants, after playing the scenario one, trying to find a blue ball, you can't really see it in the beginning because there's a secret doorway that has to open once either AI agent or human agent touches it, and it kind of opens up. The idea is that we wanted to create the second scenario to be not apparent to the human agent so that they're able to kind of perceive like how AI is doing something different. They need to kind of push that kind of dynamics of learning to be in a different way. And of course, the AI agent, especially in these kind of reinforcement learning environments, how they learn in the beginning is through more probabilistically just trying different things in like a randomized trial, while the human might be more directed to it. So there's also more likelihood in scenario two that the AI agents will stumble upon opening that door rather than human agents who are not necessarily thinking about human participants and not necessarily thinking about touching the door to open it up itself. I already made this point. And then, of course, in between the rounds, we're also doing an iterative way. The AI systems is kind of processing what they have seen and then engaging in more kind of with these kind of probabilistic testings of trying to learn how they can optimize reaching these goals too. The idea of imitation learning is that the AI system watches how human participants doing, and then based on their learning, they're able to approach. So out of these things, what are the kind of studies that learnings emerge is that there's two major dynamics that we consider from this research that we saw. One is the instrumental dynamic. So this is something that we're used to and something that we kind of still kind of talks about it intuitively. A lot of the participants kind of approached the AI system within this context as a tool. Um, they're trying to fulfill a certain objective of kind of solving this problem. They use AI agents, machine agents to fulfill the objectives. And there's a lot of different ways. One is testing new types of strategies and things by using the machine itself. The other aspects, of course, start to emerge is the idea of a relational dynamic. Uh, I think all participants participate in the study, they start kind of engaging in an activity that we consider as a very relational. So these things kind of triggered as they start to notice the commonality between themselves and the AI agent. And then one of the key things is they start talking to the AI system and then also naming them. So here's a kind of example of one of the participants talked about, hello, Mr. Cube, hello, Cube, like, where are you going? Oh, there you are. Like, these are very kind of apparent kind of signs upon which people start attributing names and then talking to the AI system, even though the AI system was not talking to them. The relational dynamic, what's also interesting, and this is kind of where the creative learning kind of start kicking more and more, is that people are kind of indifferent towards like maximizing point. Once they start entering into this kind of relational aspects of it, people start caring about making points. That's kind of the behavior that we saw. And then kind of the three different aspects of relational dynamic we saw. So one is kind of paternalistic. They're approaching AI system almost like a pet. The other aspects is they're more antagonistic. Like, I don't trust what AI system is doing. I'm going to do it on my own, or I'm going to do it in a way that you can understand. And the last aspect of it is empathetic. Like, I'm a little bit more collaborative, trying to have the AI system to take a lead in problem solving. And they're way more emotionally engaged in those things. How does these kind of relationship dynamic, where does things begin? Of course, based on the people's different experiences, they may start in a more instrumental dynamics, but oftentimes they do enter into more relational dynamics. And a difference in their prior experience with AI systems, other things kind of influence it. Once they get into the relational dynamic, it kind of stays there. There's no one relational dynamic is better than the another. Either it's instrumental dynamics or relational dynamics in either the category. It does kind of fosters engaging in creative learning activities. And one of the kind of things kind of start to emerge is that this ambiguity, this idea of uncanniness. When they're not sure, they're not really a pet, they're not really a human collaborator, they're not really something, they're not really a tool. That uncertainty in between and transitions between those kind of the dynamics, that's kind of we saw as a potential for where the people are trying something really different and experimenting with this idea. So I know I just passed the 30-minute mark, but I think in the next 3 or 4 minutes, I can kind of think about the implications of focus. So where these kind of empirical works and studies kind of leading up to? One of the kind of example that I often talk about both with companies and industry partners and my students is my experience of seeing how the creative industry was kind of impacted um, in the New York, especially indie rock scenes and music scene, and how the streaming industry has really kind of changed, that as the technology and adoption in the field changed. And one can argue, and is a reality, that we can say that streaming technology has created a great potential for emerging artists and others to kind of reach a global audience. But at the same time, in terms of revenue model of these new types of music consumptions and distribution, significantly affected, especially the early stage and the emerging creatives, where in the past they might have generated revenues through CD sales and other aspects of it. Something is more tangible by engaging in the creative works. Those opportunity has disappeared um, as the revenue model for emerging creatives had to focus on live shows or merchandise sales. Live show for sure, but there's an issue of scale. You can only host so many people at a bar or a venue. So in terms of scaling and then creating a sustainable financial model for especially emerging creative, I would consider the streaming industry was very adversely affected, as entire generations of indie rock artists was kind of affected by those. And I think about this example a lot as we're seeing these types of technologies being adopted in both in a learning context and also in the industry itself. And one of the kind of things that I start to see more and more is really articulating, because of the relational dynamic that emerged in the participants and also the amount of automations that happens in the creative process, I'm start pushing for this idea is that AI has to be really kind of understood as an agent rather than it's not necessarily simply a tool, and oftentimes instrumental aspects of it lead to the relational dynamic. Also, because it's automating so much, that we have to think about this as more than a tool. We have to, and then it's not a collaborator, it's not a human peer. The AI system does not have emotional boundaries and feedback as we would do with a human collaborator. So AI has to be understood something in between, something in the middle, and it's an agent itself. And this kind of view is critical to think about because it's acknowledging beyond the other significant topics of how this AI system was came to be, the ethical considerations around those. As we think about AI is not as a tool, but as an agent itself, there we have to be acknowledging the amount of labor that one would do in their creative work and what labors am I shifting off to, outsourcing it to the agent to do things. And that affects our creative practices significantly. So one of the things I start to do with these kind of research and work is start hosting much more like a pedagogy of the algorithm, pedagogy, in what way can art and design faculties think about these types of issues and incorporate in their classrooms. And these are some of the work that I've been doing with my collaborator, Andrew Shea, in developing courses and teaching emerging creatives about what are the implications and limitations of these types of work. It's something that I've been actively engaging to have our current professors and teachers and educators to understand the limitations and possibility of the tools. And this I'll put in the chat after the presentation too, is this is my collaborator, Andrew Shea, design professor, also think critically about and developing a kind of pedagogy and developing a platform upon designers to kind of approach these tools in a more ethical and critical way. One of the things that I've been also kind of doing more is creating more artistic spaces, just like the symposium that we're engaging today, where our emerging creative students is how they're experimenting with these types of technology in their creative practice. We're fostering that through exhibitions. But one of the kind of emerging work that I've been engaging is it's not enough for them to experimenting on the computational methodologies, the new forms of art, but also it's critical for them to engaging in the policies and systematic impact of how this technology is doing society, and then really kind of educating them and then pushing them to engage in an activism and organizing on how they defend their own rights, in what way they can, if they are critical about how these systems are training is capacity based on their works in the internet, in what way you navigate that and what way you can kind of change policies to kind of impact the shaping of these tools in the creative industry itself. And one of the kind of major aspects of these types of work is seeing that how this technology is going to impact significantly in not just in illustration design, not just in photography, but in all aspects of design and artistic practices. So seeing that impact and is critical to think about the actions that we do to shape not only how this can be experimented, but thinking the largest systems of industry can actually affect the developments of a lot of these artistic and design fields moving forward. So that is a little bit of remarks and things that I prepared for our discussion today. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Jeongki. Thank you so much for that. I think that was such a great way to sort of start up this symposium, is thinking, yeah, about creativity and also education and what that means sort of throughout the process. I think that set us up really, really nicely. Thank you very much for that. And just a reminder to everyone, please do just pop your questions in the chat. Alternatively, you can now use the raise hand function to ask any questions if you would prefer to do that audibly. But I would like to kick us off with a question, if that's all right. I was thinking a little bit about the idea of copyright, because I attended Photo Vogue last year's edition of Photo Vogue, and I heard a panel talking about AI and copyright, and they were saying that um, there's a proposal that in order to get copyright for an image that you have created using AI technologies, you have to show that the person has intervened in the image enough to a certain extent for it to count or to be eligible for copyright. And I guess I was wondering, in terms of like to what extent does that sort of relate to your ideas of creativity and to your research on creativity? Like, is to what extent is that human intervention, is there a threshold, I guess, at which that becomes more associated with creativity?
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is a kind of the domain upon which the legal constructs is evolving as these technologies evolving.
Mm.
And we are where I'm seeing, especially from US context, um, I think to an extent, I think European unions and the systems and the kind of laws and regulations being passed, kind of protecting these creative rights, IPs, and has been a little bit more, I would say, one step ahead than the US system that is much more industry friendly and also letting the courts and the cases to kind of determine where those directions are going. At this stage, and I can speak more from the US perspective. In this case with copyrights, like can the AI system itself can kind of own up that, hey, AI created the work, can this work be attributed to AI? In the US regulatory practices, US patent offices and copyright laws are currently not acknowledging the AI system by themselves is considered as a work that comes out. So there has to be acknowledgement, and always think about how does a person engaging in that creative processes with the AI system is determining that amount of that work is considered as a kind of key aspects of who owns that work. Now, but if that's the government stance and think about intellectual property, what's interesting is what's shaping out in the industry practice themselves. And welcome to the world of United States and then power of litigation, is that a lot of the companies has been hesitant in fully embracing, especially when it comes to generative AI and images, works, because a lot of the systems has been trained on data sets that did not get a pre-assigned kind of copyright approval to begin with. Therefore, many of the kind of companies are hesitant on using these tools in an external capacity because of the potential litigation that can happen, the copyright challenges. Now, this does not mean that companies in their internal work are adopting these kind of AI systems significantly, because then the questions of copyright contestation is less likely. So internally, they're using a lot of these tools, and that is shaping how much kind of work they go into producing the work and what kind of job get created is affected by it. Um, and the as we think about how this create like the rights and IPs are shaping it, is even though one types of kind of system might be just trained on the copyrighted images, then the output itself might be not as good as the one that had just sucked up all the internet. Yeah, so sorry gave you a little bit of rambling answer here, but I think this is a very kind of emerging field in the topics when we think about intellectual properties and copyrights issues. But in the context of US, both these trials and case laws and litigations is shaping the practices, while at the same time, government regulatory practices has a very specific view at this stage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And it is, I think, very much an iterative process, isn't it? Where sort of the law is trying to keep up with the technologies, and it's all quite yeah, iterative. We have a question here from Margareta, who says, you have utilized communication as a measure of creativity. And I'm curious why communication was specifically chosen. She says that some might argue that communication engages different types of cognitive processes than those typically associated with creativity. Could you speak to that maybe a little bit?
Yeah,
Great
definitely. I
question,
think
Margareta.
thank you, Margareta. The key aspects of how approach and define the notions of creativity, that what we consider as something new and useful has to be situated within the social and cultural aspects of it. One might engage in an individual intrapsychological level of what's considered as new and useful from my own perspective. But even that idea is in my head, I'm articulating this concept. But beyond just individualistic way to judge what is considered as new and useful, the concept that is especially to foster more, I would consider in the framework of creative learning, interchanging with somebody else, whether it's a peer, teachers, and students, that is critical. So both my own act of articulating, an act of communicating, and also in order for that kind of artifacts that I'm producing ideas need to be interchanged with other stakeholders in the system as a key aspects of it. Um, so that's kind of one of the reasons I kind of focus on the notions of speaking as a key aspects of it. Now, is it a perfect way to measure it? And then also there's another aspects of it is that it's in the context of these empirical studies, it's also obvious. It's hard to measure brain activities when children are drawing or participants are drawing, but we can capture talking. That's also the kind of elements of why we kind of focus on that as in one of the associative actions of creative learning. Now, the second study for sure, so we start thinking about the notions of talking, but a third study also get into the kind of the challenges, exactly how you're describing it. Talking is just kind of trying to capture the talking as one of the aspects of kind of capturing the creative learning. It's a little bit of blunt way of thinking about um, what's considered as creative. So is it a perfect indicator? No. Is it a one indicator? Sure. it's that's my answer to that question.
That's great. Thanks very much. Um, yes, so we just have oh yes, so Simon Peter Green has also just popped in a link there that people might find interesting, so we can go check that out later. Can I ask another question if nobody else in the room has a question at the minute? Um, I was thinking about another event that I was recently at, which was the Association for Photography and Higher Education. And there was a lecture that was given on, a lecturer who's been using a little bit of AI in the classroom. And I thought it was really interesting because I think a lot of the fears that came out from other participants in the room really had to do with a fear of, if students are learning how to, uh, shoot or create an image that looks like a perfectly lit loaf of bread on a
Mhm.
table, will that sort of make the skills of like studio lighting obsolete, or will students be less interested in that? And it made me think a little bit about, what you were saying about the labor that's outsourced. And I guess
Mhm.
what happens when we outsource that labor, and
Mhm.
how have you seen students react to that?
Mhm. Yeah, I think from the efficiency perspective,
Mm,
we all kind of fall into it, right? I mean, recently I've been working on like artistic research and documentary project. My creative collaborator, when they're kind of developing like a pitch text and storyboard, he was using Midjourney because there was a with the budget that we had, that's kind of he could have hired a designer and illustrator to do the work, but he did not, right? He's just like, well, I can save money here by using Midjourney.
mm,
Um, So for me, I approach that in the two aspects of it. One, on the pedagogical level, um, for folks who have already know how to do that lighting and how to do the set designs, once they have that skills, it's actually really great because they don't have to expend and time to engage on this. But for especially emerging creative who have never done before or in the early stage of how to do lighting and understand those, when we get rid of that processes, then they become dependent upon
mhm.
these computational methods. So I think kind of in terms of capacity development, it's important to continuously engage in the action to develop those skills. On the industry level, similar to the kind of the example of job that was disappeared in my documentary projects, is Um, yeah, a lot of people talk about how these AI systems will enable people to do other stuff because it's automating what's considered a mundane task. Like, oh, it'll make you able to, yeah, you can do the color correction with AI so that you don't have to worry about this. You can actually focus more on the creative project. Like people talk about those things. And I'm a little bit on the party pooper side of those conversations because it is a mundane jobs that pays the rent. Like Andy Warhol did not become an Andy Warhol because he was doing fine art from the get-go. Andy Warhol was doing illustrations for magazines and other things. And that types of rent-paying job was what it was a practice. One was he was practicing his own craft and skills while he was making rent. That led to more iterative and process upon which to develop one artistic practice and so on. So for me, that disappearance of that set designs and aspects of it, beyond just pedagogy and learning perspective, as we get rid of those mundane jobs, this is where we're breaking down the future of creative industry. So I'm
Yeah.
very much of a defender and advocacy of it.
I think that's a really interesting point as well. If I can just ask a follow-up to that, I guess, is that in my own creative practice, I have found that the mundane jobs are actually sometimes what helps spark me to new creative outcomes, or like my failures, like in the dark room, are actually what result in like a new direction. And so, I guess I wonder, yeah, do you view the potential for a negative effect on creativity, or do you or is it just more complicated than that? That you know what I mean? Because I guess the mundane, the iterative, the failing, the working through problems, I think is food for the creative process a lot of times in my own experience. But and so I guess I wonder if we're eliminating that, is there a risk?
Yeah, I think yeah to yes, and yes, and to be judicious about it is we have to think critically. Of course, using these computational methodologies, engaging it, we may develop new practice for sure. There's nothing wrong with those. But I'm with you. We have to think really critically
Mm.
what aspects of creative learning action, whether it's articulating, being, and showing, mentally kind of coming up with a new way that we are getting rid of, will
Mhm.
affect my ability to cover more conceptual domains, develop skills. Because the creative research are showing, how does one develop what's novel and new and useful to my own practices, but to the domains in the field, comes from when you have reached a certain maturity of the conceptual domain. So if we're not engaging a lot of action to cover a lot of conceptual domain, then that will lead to less likelihood of one to be in a situation able to make something new.
Absolutely. No, I think that that makes a lot of sense. Well, that's great. I mean, if there are no further questions, then we can leave it there. Um, And oh, here we do have a one more question from Jesse. So who says, yes, about the mundane and failures and faults, the importance of developing one's craft as well as creativity. I wonder how these shortcuts using AI creatively impact on resilience. Of all the things above, are all of the things above are what lead to resilience, and this ultimately impacts creativity. I think that idea of resilience is really interesting. Would you like to comment on that, Jeongki?
Yeah, another way we call it about resilience, the grind, right? Yeah, the hours and hours one spends on those dark rooms, or hours and hours that I spend on developing, fine-tuning images or writing. The grind is also give us the grits and the perspectives as we tackle on the new projects, able to kind of to do on. Yeah,
Mm,
with you. It's the notions of resiliency is tied much to this idea of a necessity of the mundane. And then I call it a mundane, but it's in a fancy terminology, it's called exploratory creative action.
I like that reframing, actually. That makes the mundane seem a lot more productive.
Exploring in this dark room, exploring, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, very good. No, I like that. Oh, well, that's great. Well, thank you very much for your question, Jesse, and thank you very much for your time, John Key. I really enjoyed hearing from you, and I'm sure everybody else did as well. Um, if you if any of you are available this afternoon, we're going to have a great panel discussion that's going to be moderated by Dr. Tara Pixley. We're going to hear from two artists and thinkers and writers who are using AI in their creative practice. So I think that that will hopefully follow on really nicely from this conversation that we've sort of launched with this morning. So please do check back in. It's the same Zoom link. So you can check back in at Daisy, tell me the time. What time is it? Is it 3 p.m. GMT?
It's 2 GMT and 3 CET.
Okay, perfect. That's great. Thank you so much. Right. Well, thank you all so much for attending, and I hope to see you later today and in the coming days. All right. Thanks very much. Bye bye.